Hello, very good day to all of you. Once again, I'm your honorary ma'am, and today I'm here with your supplementary lesson number 5, Footprints Without Feet, and part 2, remaining portion we will discuss in this part. Now we will come to know that what happened with Griffin, who had invented a very good discovery of how make a human being transparent or invisible. He himself become transparent or invisible, and how he is using his uh, power of science in a derogatory or in a negative way that we are seeing now what happened with him, and how far he will damage the other people property, as well as their emotions and the other things that we will see in this next part. I hope you enjoyed. Yes. Footprints without feet at Jewels. Let's see what happened next. Yes. Then, to his amazement, he realized that the room appeared to be empty. He and his wife looked under the desk and behind the curtains, and even up the chimney. There wasn't a sign of anybody. As we all know, the prior story that he invented such a chemical, he swallow it and he become invisible. Then he robbed the clothes to make himself visible, because it's a very because it is a season of cold, chill air of the season of cold chill air in January. So he slowly and steadily tried to cover himself. He tried to cover himself with the clothes. Then he tried to cover himself with the dress with the clothes to save himself from this effect of air. Then he entered in the store when it closed, and then he tried to uh, rob the things and go away from them. The persons try to caught him, but they won't be able to catch him, and he is successful to leave that place, and he came to the one village, and he booked a room over there, and he paid in advance. But after some day, he won't be able to pay more for that room. He won't be able to afford. And then he said that he was waiting for a check to come, and he entered invisible in the clergyman's home, and he tried to rob clergyman, and he tried to make money from that home. And at that time, clergyman and his wife wake early, and after seeing some kind of movement in their home, they try to find out person, but Griffin was invisible, so he won't be able to see anyone. And at last, clergyman said that surrender, and then we left. Now come to the next paragraph. Then, to his amazement, he realized that the room appeared to be empty. He and his wife looked under the desk and behind the curtains, and even up the chimney. There wasn't a sign of anybody. Now, to their surprises, they couldn't see anyone because the griffin was invisible. So they won't be able to see anyone. They looked under the desk, behind the curtains, and also up the chimney, but the person was nowhere to be seen. But there is no sign of anybody because he was invisible. So it's not a sign, but they amazed that if there is no one is there, the room is empty, then why they are hearing such a movement of a person. He and his wife look under the desk, behind the curtains, even up the chimney. They have also searched, but there is no sign of anybody. Yet the desk had been opened and the housekeeping money was missing. Extraordinary affair. The clergyman kept saying for the rest of the day. But it was not as extraordinary as the behavior of Mrs. Hall's furniture a little later that morning. Now, yet the desk had been open because there is no sign of person anywhere, though the desk had been open and the housekeeping money was gone. Then the clergyman kept on saying that extraordinary affair the whole day because he was shocked by the incident. But the thing that happened with Mrs. Hall's furniture were much more fascinating. Now, what happened? That there is no sign of any person in the room, though they find that the desk is open and the housekeeping money was missing. So, if there is no one, then who stole that money and why the desk is open? So, this is an extraordinary affair, and for all the day, clergyman kept saying for the rest of the day, means whole day he was thinking about that incident only. But he says that this incident was not as extraordinary as happened with Mrs. Hall's furniture a little later that morning. Now what happened over there? The landlord and his wife were up very early. They were surprised to yet the desk had been. Yes, Mrs. Hale and her husband woke up very early and were surprised as the door to the guest room was open. Yes, the landlord and his wife were up very early, and were surprised to see the scientist's door wide open. Usually it was shut and locked, and he was furious if anyone entered his room. The opportunity seems too good to be missed. Yes. Now what happened? That Mrs. Hall and her husband woke up very early and were surprised as the door to the guest room was open. Usually his room's door remained closed and locked, and he used to get very angry if anyone tried to entering his room. It was an opportunity, and Mrs. Hall did not want to miss it. So she really wants to. One day, Mr. and Mrs. Hall wake up very early, and they were surprised as the door of the scientist's room was open. The guest room was open. Usually, his room's door always remained closed or locked. And if someone tried to enter in his room, then he become very angry. But today the door is open, so Mr. and Mrs. Hall did not want to miss the chance. So she wants to know what happened inside the room. They peeped round the door, saw nobody, and decided to investigate. The bedclothes were cold, showing that the scientist must have been up for some time. And stranger still, the clothes and bandages that he always wore were laying about the room. Now, usually his room's door remained closed and locked. He used to get very angry if anyone tried to entering his room. Now it was an opportunity, and Mrs. Hall did not want to miss it. So they decided to investigate. When they saw that nobody was inside the room, his bed sheets were cold, which showed that he must have been up for a while, and also all the bandages that he used to tie around his face were laying around the room. Okay, so she shows that bed clothes were cold, means he used to get up early, no one has slept on the bed for a time. Then he showed that the bandages he used to cover on his face is laying on the room openly, so no one is there in the room. All of a sudden, Mrs. Hall heard a sniff close to her ear. A moment later, the hat on the bedpost leapt up and dashed itself into her face. Now, what happened? That all the bandages that he used to tie around his face were laying around the room. Now, suddenly, what happened? Mrs. Hall heard a sniff close to her ear, and Griffin's hat that was laying on the bedpost flung towards Mrs. Hall and hit her on her face. So, this happened that no one is there, and the hat of this guest was laying on the bed. It suddenly flung and hit on the face of the Mrs. Hall. Then the bedroom chair became alive. Springing into the air, it charged straight at her, legs foremost. As she and her husband turned away in terror, the extraordinary chair pushed them both out of the room and then appeared to slam and lock the door after them. Now, what happened? Then the chair in the room dashed itself, hitting Mrs. Hall in her legs. As they got scared, Mrs. Hall and her husband were going out of the room when the chair closed the door, and suddenly a sound of slamming the door and locking were heard. Now, what happened? That suddenly the chair of the room dashed itself. Okay, then it started hitting Mrs. Hall in her legs. As they got scared, Mrs. Hall and her husband were going out for a. After seeing the chair in the air, and that flying chair pushed them out of the door, and then it appeared. Then it seems that chair slammed the door, and there is a knock off or a sound of lock the door from inside. They were heard. Mrs. Hall almost fell down in the stairs in hysterics. She was convinced that the room was haunted by spirits and that the stranger had somehow caused this to enter into her furniture. My poor mother used to sit in that chair, she moaned, to think it should rise up against me now. The feeling among the neighbors was that the trouble was caused by witchcraft. Now, this terrorized Mrs. Hall, and she was about to fall down from the stairs. She was convinced of the thought that there were spirits in her aunt's room and that the stranger had caused this to happen. So, she believes that now there is something like a magic and a witchcraft kind of thing over there. Some spirits are there in that room, and and she almost fell down from the stairs, and she convinced that there was such a spirit in her aunt's room, and that is why stranger has caused this to happen. She mourned that her mother used to sit in the chair which hit her legs, and thought that how could it rise up against her. The neighbors of Mrs. Hall thought that it was a witchcraft which had caused such a things to happen. Now she started mourning that, oh, my mother used to sit in that chair, and the chair hits her leg, and thought that how it could rise up against her. The neighbor of Mrs. Hall's thought that it was a witchcraft which had caused such a things to happen. Generally, these are certain ideas came into our mind. But witchcraft or not, when news of Mr. Bulgari at the clergyman's home became known, the strange scientist was strongly suspected of having had a hand in it. Suspicions grew even stronger when he suddenly produced some ready cash. Though he had admitted not long before that he had no money, the village constable was secretly sent for. Now, when the news of the Bulgari at the clergyman's house reached other people in the town, everyone started suspecting the strange scientist. Suspicions grew stronger on him when he produced ready cash for his payment at the inn, even though he had told some time back that he did not have money and was waiting for a check to arrive. The village constable was called for, and Mrs. Hall did not want to wait for him. So now, uh, the next day, the rumors or the news of that clergyman, that bulgari at the clergyman's house was reached to the people, because it's a very small town, so it's a spread like a air. And then everyone started suspecting a strange scientist, because suspicion grew very much stronger on him when he produced Radicash, because before a little bit time he argued that he didn't have money and he was waiting for a check, and all of a sudden he is ready to pay money to the Mrs. Hall. So payment at the inn, even though he had told some time back that he did not have money and he was waiting for a check to arrive. And the village constable was called for, and Mrs. Hall did not want to wait for him, so he asked constable. Instead of waiting for the constable, Mrs. Hall went to the scientist, who had somehow mysterious appeared from his empty bedroom. "I want to know what you have been doing to my chair upstairs," she demanded. "And I want to know how it is you came out of an empty room and how you entered a locked room." Now, Mrs. Hall did not want to wait for him, so she went straight to Griffin, as he had appeared from the empty bedroom at the inn. She asked him what he been doing upstairs to her chair and furniture. She also asked him how did he come out of the empty bedroom or entered in the locked bedroom. So she was furious that when she was go and see the room, at that time he was not present there, and after that that chair push to Mr. and Mrs. Hall, and then they heard the sound of locking the room. So now she is curious that what he is doing in the empty room, because he was not visible, and how he re-entered in that locked room. The scientist was always quick-tempered. Now he became furious. "You don't understand who or what I am," he shouted. "Very well, I'll show you." Suddenly he threw off bandages, whiskers, spectacles, and even nose. It took him only a minute to do this. Now what happened? That the scientists become really angry and started shouting that they don't understand who or what he was, and decided to show them the truth. So he started remove his bandages, his whiskers, spectacles, and also his nose, which is made from the help of this bandages and all. So the constant and frequent questions of Mrs. Hall's, the curiosity of her, make scientists really angry and frustrated, and he started shouting that they don't understand who and what he was, and decided to show them the truth. So he started removing his bandages, his whiskers, spectacles, and his nose also. Okay, and it took him just a minute for him to do all this. Okay, so he started removing the things, bandages, whiskers, spectacles, and all, and this is how he'll become invisible. The horrified people in the bar found themselves staring at a headless man. Mr. Jaffers, the constable, now arrived and was quite surprised to find that he had to arrest a man without a head. Now, the people in the bar, they were horrified as they looked at the headless man, because he had prepared this head and nose with the help of the bandage and remove all, then they won't be able to see the head, and they are very surprised seeing a headless person in front of them. The constable, Mr. Jaffers of the village, was surprised as he showed that he had to arrest a man without any head. And Mr. Jaffer, the constable, was also surprised, who belongs to a village. He surprised that he had to arrest a man without any head. So he has to arrest a person who hasn't a head. Means certain kind of a, not an identity. So whom I have to arrest, and I am arresting a person without a person who is without a head. But Jeffers was not easily prevented from doing his duty. If a magistrate's warrant ordered a person's arrest, then that person had to be arrested with or without his head. There followed a remarkable scene as the policeman tried to get hold of a man who was becoming more and more invisible as he threw off one garment after another. Now what happened? But Jaffer still wanted to do his duty, as he knew that the magistrate wanted him to arrest the person, and it did not matter that he had a head or not. Now, being a police constable, his duty is to arrest a culprit. Whether he has a head or not, it doesn't matter for the magistrate. So, he really wants to fulfill his duty, but as he threw away more and more of his clothes, he became more and more invisible. And finally, after Griffin, the way he was put off his garments from his body, he became more and more invisible. And the duty of cop or Mr. Jaffer's duty has become more hard, because the way he used to, the more and more he threw away his clothes, he become more and more invisible. Finally, a shot flew into the air, and the constable found himself struggling with someone he could not see at all. Some people tried to help him but found themselves hit by blows that seemed to come from nowhere. Now, what happened that people who tried to helping Jeffers, now after Griffin removed his shirt, he was nowhere to be seen, and Jaffer was struggling to arrest a man who had become completely invisible. First, his head was invisible. After that, completely he threw out his uh, clothes, and then he totally become invisible. Now it is not possible for Jeffers to arrest him. He was struggling to arrest a man who had become completely invisible. People who tried to helping Jeffers were also struggling, as they were hit by blows from nowhere. Okay, so they were also the people who tried to helping Jeffers were also struggling, as they were hit by blows from nowhere. Okay, you just hit like a wind, because he was invisible. So it was like that you are hit by the blow, and people wants to help him, but they are helpless because the man is invisible. It's like an air whom you cannot catch. So he become more powerful with this kind of things. In the end, Jaffer was knocked unconscious as he made a last attempt to hold on the unseen scientist. There were nervous, excited cries to hold him, but this was easier said than done. Griffin had shaken himself free, and no one knew where to lay hands on him. Now, as Jeffers made his last attempt to catch hold of the invisible man, he was knocked unconsciously by the invisible man. Everybody was shouting, "Hold him!" repeatedly, but Griffin had set himself free from them, and nobody could understand how to catch him. Okay, so Jeffers was at the pitch of his stride, but he won't be able to catch him because he was invisible, and he was also knocked unconscious by the invisible man. Everybody was shouting that hold him, but Griffin had set himself free from them, and nobody could understand how to catch him because he was invisible. How you can catch invisible thing or a person? And that is how they are bounded by their limitations. And though Griffin was a culprit, though he was a criminal, he was saved because he he was invented such a good chemical that will make him transparent and invisible. And this is how he will uh, save himself. Rather, we can say that Jafar was not able to catch him just because of his invisibility or transparency. Okay, and this is how he also ruined his future. He will become a very good and popular scientist. He get a reputation as well as money in his life, but he chose a wrong path. He started, you know frustrate he started making frustrated people and started harmful for them. And that is why he won't be able to be hero. Rather than he become a villain throughout the story. The greater the power, the more dangerous the abuse. you know the if person have power, then they try to use it or misuse it both. Whenever someone has power, there is a two-way use of that, use and misuse. And the greater the power, the more dangerous the abuse. Okay, at the height, how strong um, power is there. If you have a strong power, then it is more dangerous. While you are thinking about the how, if people abuse them, then it will obviously become a disaster. So the greater the power, the more dangerous the abuse. Okay, if you have power, the greater power you have, the more dangerous abuse is there. Means you have to decide, or rather you can say that you have to be ready for the dangerous abuse or misuse of that power. If you have the more greater power you have, the more dangerous misuse of there should be there, and you have to be prepared for that only. As we all know that in today's world, we all are achieving very good stage in this advancement and science. We all want a very good life. We all want a very peaceful, as well as we can say that we want a life with all the facilities. That okay, we want to do any hard work. We want everything on the tap of our this on the top of our finger, and we want to do that. But we don't know that we don't know how the other people, how the mastermind misuses this power. Okay, we know that these computer hackers, how they you know mm, misuse your personal details, how they abusing things to a particular person or a particular criteria. So this is how the greater power you have to be more worried about the more dangerous abuse of that. So this is how I would like to end my topic or end my lesson with that if you have such a power, then you must use in a positive way. Then please use that power rather than misusing that. Whatever power you have, if you have certain things, certain skills with you, then please try to convey that energy in a positive way rather than the what we can say disastrous way. It won't help you. But if you are using your power in a right path, then it will give you name, fame, money, all the things you will get from that only. Okay, and it will become the proud moment of your life rather than you feel ashamed on you. So whenever you got power, try to understand the limitation of that power and use that power in a very particular and right path, so no one can use, no one can misuse this power and try to destroy the world. So we are here as a human being, our duty to do betterment of life, betterment of society, betterment of human beings. It is our duty. So whether we have to fulfill as a human being only, if we try to misuse this great power, then it will create only chaos and disaster in the other life as well as it affect your life too, because as a human being we all are connected with each other. So today I would like to tell you that whenever, at whatever stage you will get certain power, be remember that use that power as a human being, and think about human being, that okay, if you were there, then what happened, what chaos are there, what result should be there, and work according to that, so you will never get a wrong path like Griffin had. So I hope you like the story. You will learn the lesson from this, that never misuse your power, always use this power in a positive way, so you will get better things in your life. I hope you enjoy this lesson. I hope you get better idea about this. Okay, so we will see you in the next time. Till then, stay safe, stay happy. Bye bye.